here in my sketchbook some initial character design drawings for a couple of characters that I am going to be working on in an upcoming book. I wanted to share with you today some of the design process that happens as I create something like this, because these are not quite set in stone yet, but I've been working on various aspects of their design. And so I've been creating a lot of these little drawings in that search for the essence of these characters. A super useful tool when collaborating, I've found, is to use Pinterest, because both me and the other people who are involved in the project can then start to upload images that they find, or some of them that they take when they are out and about in the world, for the various elements that might be useful in the art design of the final work. For example, I have a folder here called bladderwrack, which is one of the seaweeds that the characters is based on. And I found a bunch of pictures online. So this is a private pin board that I have on Pinterest, but I also have a number of pictures that I managed to take myself when I was out in some tide pools, and I found some bladderwrack. And both me as well as my partner for this project can then fill up albums in Pinterest with these really useful reference photos. The other seaweed that is a part of this project is Dabberlocks, which is very different from bladderwrack in that it is long and flowy and elegant looking, versus the sort of frilly and bouncy look of bladderwrack. And so I decided to use those qualities of the seaweeds themselves to sort of determine the characters as well, and their personalities and how they look. And Dabberlocks, for example, became something that is long and sinuous and elegant. And I loved the look of the the Dabberlocks seaweed as her tail element. And both of these are sea creature, mermaid, siren type characters, although we were not really tied to the idea or the concept of mermaid, in fact. And so I played with several different variations on how to approach that without necessarily going into the standard mermaid fishtail design. And so for one, with Dabberlocks, who has a little bit more of a mermaid traditional look to her, I feel, just because of the way that Dabberlocks seaweed has this long trailing thing that was ideal for a tail fin for her. So I decided not to fight with that and to instead use it for her character. And the rest of her then followed suit in this sort of sinuous and elegant shape. And what I did when starting off with these character designs was just to work on thumbnail scribbly type sketches, as you see me doing here right now, something that wouldn't take longer than a few minutes to initially design. And I did several of these in order to sort of get the feel of what direction I wanted to approach for them. And initially, in fact, I had Dabberlocks looking a bit too human and not other enough. And then I sort of veered off into the too much other and had to rein her in as well from that. As opposed to Dabberlocks, bladderwrack has a much more playful attitude to her, dictated surely by the nature of how the seaweed looks. It just looks so frilly and bouncy that I couldn't resist using that as some sort of frilly, bouncy hairdo or clothing or something for her. And it makes her feel like a much more playful and less serious creature than her sister seaweed spirit, Dabberlocks. I toyed with ideas of using that frilly seaweedness for her skirt, but that looked a little bit too much like clothing, and so it became more, I was thinking of, what are they? The sea dragons, where their fins are these sort of frilly limbs. That look a little bit like they're a mixture of fin and leg. And so I sort of use that for her as well, along with these sort of extensions of the seaweed from her shoulders in a little bit of an homage to fairies and spirits and wings, because this story takes place in the seas around England and Ireland and Scotland. And so a lot of the mythos of those types of creatures enters into the tale. Working with ink is not something I usually do in the design thumbnail phase of any project, but for some reason I felt like using ink on these sketches that I have been doing of these two characters. It adds a little bit more of a finished look to the sketch and gives me more of a chance to develop the line and the flow. The final pieces for the book will be in watercolor. And so I did have to also think about how I was going to approach these as watercolor paintings. And to that end, once I had developed the character designs enough, I did then take them into watercolor paintings as well. But even after having created a watercolor painting of each of these two characters, I've continued to doodle with them in these sort of thumbnail character sketches, because they're going to be characters that are portrayed in many illustrations in the book. And so I want to get a feel for how they move and how they are going to fit into the world that is created in the story. And it's not just a single appearance and image of them, as it is frequently with my watercolor paintings when I'm designing something and figuring out a character that is appearing in them, because frequently when I'm doing my paintings, it's just a one-off. And in this case, however, these are going to be characters that I'm going to have to be with for a while. They're going to have to live in my brain. And as such, they need to be fully fleshed in my brain, and I need to understand how they swim and how they move in their world, in their watery realm. How they look when they're hiding in a cloud of seaweed or swimming up through the water. Already at this stage in design, I'm having such fun with bladderwrack. She seems like a very cheerful little sprite. And Dabberlocks is so sinuous and elegant. I want to make sure also that I enjoy the designs of these two creatures well enough that I will be able and wanting to replicate them over and over for a series of many paintings over the course of many months. As I draw, I like to keep a window of my reference pictures up on my screen near me so that I can use them as this constant reminder and inspiration of where the source for the shapes and the flow and the movement of the creatures go or come from. I like to think about the environment that the characters would be found in. So perhaps among a bed of waving Dabberlocks fronds of seaweed, how would she fit into this? Peering out and camouflaged among them. And because of the way I have her tail forming the fronds of the seaweed, if a Dabberlocks sea sprite were to be found in the ocean, she would most likely be found clinging to the roots of the seaweed with her upper body, while her hair and her lower body swirled out behind her to hide among the other fronds and meld into the surroundings. And similarly, I like to think about where bladderwrack would fit in with her seaweeds and how she would hide among these frilly fronds. Perhaps she would be using some of them as fans for herself, because they do have that sort of fan shape to them. And since she sort of has leg-like appendages, she can sort of perch among those fronds. as if they form a throne for her. And so these are the kinds of thoughts that go through my mind as I work on these early stages of designing characters that